Hello. I must be slipping. I forgot to display my promo tonight. So rather than let it go to waste, I will display it. There it is. So, and now I'm back. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Joy. Nice to see you. Hi, Kay. Hello, Steve Wolfbrand. And thank you for sharing. Please, everybody, share as much as you can. Well, this is your bedtime? This is your bedtime? This is just starting. Carmen's back. Hiya, all my beautiful people, straight out of Facebook jail and full of piss and vinegar. Tell me, Carmen, does that violate Facebook community standards? Deborah says, hi, not to be a defeatist, but although I'm staying on top of all the developments, it seems futile to dwell on it with this hopeless government. Just remember, the Borg also said resistance is futile. And Joy says, we've had a bad week so far. Yeah. It's been a bad week, but I understand that Neera Tanden was having a tough time in the Senate today with her confirmation hearings. But John Kennedy was giving her a really, really bad time. He really raked her over the coals. He even attacked her for attacking Bernie. He really, really, really raked her over the coals. He did a real inquiry. He was really tough. When he finished, there was nothing left of her. Whether she'll be confirmed or not, I don't know. It depends on the Democrats. If all the Republicans say no, then it takes only one Democrat to torpedo her. And Bernie has all the reason in the world to do so, except, of course, that Biden would not care for it. But really, 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 we don't want her in OMB. On the other hand, Biden might turn around and go to Bruce Reed to be the director of OMB, which, while not as irritating as Neera Tanden, would probably be worse from a policy point of view. Hello, Steve Gonzo. How are you tonight? Okay, let's get to talking about things. Let's get to some of the healthcare news first of all. There's a vaccine bottleneck. I'm sure you've heard about that. There was a pretty good article on CNN about it, too. Joe Biden set a vaccination target of $100 million doses in his first 100 days. However, healthcare workers were already meeting the goal of administering an average of 1 million doses a day. Biden has already raised the bar, saying he hopes to get 1.5 million doses per day done. But the article says the new administration can and should do more to accelerate the rollout of the vaccine. The article was written by Isaac Larkin, PhD, who has worked on lipid nanoparticle delivery vehicles for RNA and proteins. I presume that could be used for delivery of these RNA messenger vaccines. But he's also a research fellow with the think tank New Consensus, which is a progressive think tank. Oh, gee, I just see on CNN today that Marty Schottenheimer has died. The old linebacker and later coach of the New York Giants. I only remember him as coach of the Giants. He was 77, 5 years younger than I am. Scary. The Trump administration's abject failure to coordinate a federal strategy means we're facing immediate bottlenecks in distributing the vaccine. But in the medium term, manufacturing capacity could become the primary barrier to accelerating vaccinations. And the New York Times said last month that our limitations in manufacturing make it impossible to increase the supply before April, while the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world estimated in September that it would take until 2024 at the earliest to vaccinate everyone on Earth, which is something we really need to try to do, of course. So how do we do it? The appearance of strains that could partially resist the current vaccines makes scaling vaccine production even more urgent. The longer we wait to vaccinate everyone, the more we risk resistant strains evolving, mutants, of course, and spreading, prolonging the pandemic and necessitating further rounds of vaccination. It's time to get much more ambitious about making vaccines. So basically, what do we have to do? We have to use the Defense Production Act, is what the article is saying. And what we have to do is see to it that the intellectual property of the vaccine manufacturers, Moderna, Pfizer, and their partners, is not allowed to stand in the way of distributing the vaccine know-how to others. In a situation like this, it's entirely reasonable and legal for the U.S. government to step in and help alleviate some of the bottlenecks caused by intellectual property assignments. There's historical precedent for this. During World War II, the U.S. was cut off from the natural rubber supply from Southeast Asia to meet the demand for this material, which was critical to the war effort. The U.S. government got a group of companies and academic researchers to share the findings from more than 200 patents in the effort to create synthetic rubber. During World War I, the U.S. government basically forced the two companies that controlled key patents to aircraft technology to pool their IP in order to aid in the wartime scale-up of airplane production. That's what we did. We used the Defense Production Act, gives the government the right to request detailed information from both the vaccine manufacturers and their suppliers about their product compositions, their manufacturing methods, and their supply chains. And the U.S. government has the right under number 28, section 28, Article 28 of the U.S. Code, section 1498, to use methods and technical information covered by any U.S. patents for federal vaccine production efforts, as well as the right under DPA section 4555 to disclose publicly any confidential technical specifications obtained from manufacturers deemed essential in the interest of defending the nation. The new administration can also utilize the Bayh-Dole Act That's most probably, well, it might not be Birch Bayh. Might be his son Evan Bayh, but I'm betting it was Birch Bayh, which allows the government to, quote, march in, take patents on inventions created with federal funding and grant them under certain circumstances to third parties. Since the Moderna vaccine was developed primarily with public funds, and because mass scale-up is urgently needed to meet health and safety needs, the U.S. government could license the IP for the vaccine's formulation and manufacturing process to other companies. As part of a publicly driven, ideally global vaccine manufacturing mobilization. The Biden administration could then lead a public campaign to recruit every person and company with relevant experience and capacity toward the building and operating of vaccine production lines. Biden's already issued an executive order outlining his intention to create a public health job corps and expressed his commitment to hire 100,000 people to aid in testing and contact tracing. He should go further and create a vaccine production jobs corps to enlist Americans in a nationwide effort to help make vaccines and necessary supplies. A similar mobilization for masks and tests would also be helpful. A primary task for such a corps would be to construct and operate new factories, as some of the vaccine bottlenecks, particularly for the novel RNA vaccines, require new manufacturing techniques and equipment that few companies currently employ. So normally it would but take months, or even years to build and staff the new pharmaceutical factories that are necessary. But the Biden administration could accelerate those timelines by partnering experts in CGMP facility construction with logistics and manpower from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and by leveraging the detailed information about current vaccine production facilities obtained through the DPA. And the U.S. government could directly pay for and build and own these production lines, pay companies to operate them throughout the pandemic, and then repurpose them afterward. The government-owned, contractor-operated GOCO factory model was used to build and pay for much of the material in World War II to great effect. COVID-19 has now killed more Americans than in World War II. Indeed, we just went over 480,000 COVID fatalities. Let me get the exact figure for you. As soon as my computer will cooperate. 483,200 according to Worldometer, 1,455 fatalities per million. That's 1,455 fatalities per million. Terrible. 3,432 fatalities today in the United States. Went up by 11 fatalities per million, if I recall correctly, from yesterday. So of course, the UK is still having a bloodbath there at 1,686 fatalities per million. They had 1,001 fatalities today, which corresponds to 4,880 fatalities in U.S. equivalents. It's really amazing. They've been taking a terrible bath lately. Czechia, too, they're just behind the UK with 1,646. It looks terrible in some of these countries. COVID is simply slaughtering people. But yes, we have more fatalities than we had in the Second World War. So, getting back to the piece. We need to launch a full-fledged effort to end the pandemic by mobilizing both companies and people to produce vaccines. We could share the surplus and the freezers for distribution with the rest of the world, and perhaps even leverage our manufacturing capacity after the pandemic toward a decade-long R&D push, a moonshot, if you will, to take down existing and emerging infectious diseases around the globe. Some of Biden's team probably agree, like the Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, I think one pronounces it, Biden's Surgeon General nominee and co-chair of the president's coronavirus task force, has indicated the task force has discussed the idea of building out GoCo bioreactor factories that the government could harness for rapid vaccine and therapeutic production in future pandemics. But the Biden administration has yet to adopt this proposal. So that's something it has to do. If the pandemic doesn't end soon, the global economy could suffer losses exceeding $9 trillion if wealthier countries are fully vaccinated by the middle of the year, while poorer countries face a lag, with wealthier countries absorbing nearly half of these costs, $4.5 trillion in GDP lost to the wealthier countries if the poor countries are not also vaccinated. That's important to keep in mind. Biden has already committed to using the DPA to alleviate supply chain and distribution bottlenecks. He should go much further and leverage every available tool in his considerable arsenal towards expanding vaccine productive capacity. Now, only then can we end this pandemic, rebuild our economy, and get Americans back to better lives. Let us mobilize, says Larkin. And I think we all have to agree with that, don't we? That's essential. Nothing should stand in the way of the mobilization. Nothing should stand in the way of getting the whole world off of COVID as quickly as we can make it happen. So, second piece of healthcare news relates to another study done by Gerald Friedman, who, if you recall, was helpful to Bernie Sanders in some of the cost estimates he generated for Medicare for All. But next is a piece from Portside and the name of it is Medicare Expansion is a discount compared to Obamacare. And this is by Gerald Friedman and Travis Campbell, and it originally appeared in The Hill, February 7th, 2021. There's a picture of Harris, Kamala Harris, talking Medicare for All. Remember, she was supporting Medicare for All. At first, she was a co-sponsor, I believe, of Bernie's bill, if I'm not mistaken, before she backed off. Senator Gillibrand is there, Mazie Hirono in the picture, and Richard Blumenthal, as well. So a whole bunch of people standing behind, where is Bernie? He should be there somewhere. But anyway, President Biden's ambitious program to fix American health care, this is from the article, Portside, will succeed only if health care costs are brought under control. This can only be done with Medicare, which has a scale and simplicity that allow the administrative efficiency and the market power needed to control costs. And it's mentioned by Gerald Friedman here that there are two parts to Joe Biden's roadmap for healthcare. How do we know what his roadmap is? and the reference is to joebiden.com, but it's to the Unity Task Force recommendations, which I don't know how serious Joe Biden was in accepting those particular recommendations, so I don't know how valid it is to refer to this as Biden's particular roadmap. If I recall correctly, Ocasio-Cortez was sitting on that particular Unity Task Force. And I'm not sure Joe Biden sees, and also Jayapal, and I'm not sure that Joe Biden sees eye to eye to them on what to do about health care. But anyway, taking it seriously, the two parts included the Affordable Care Act, and he wanted to do this by increasing the subsidies for private health insurance that were in the Affordable Care Act, and also by expanding Medicare. In other words, expanding means essentially lowering the age from 65 to, say, 55 or 65 to 50. While both approaches will increase access, only Medicare has the proven ability to control costs, says Friedman and Travis Campbell. Had a double check on the last name of Travis Campbell. So, since 2008, private health insurance costs per enrollee have risen almost twice as fast as Medicare, by 51%, compared to 26% per enrollee for Medicare. Inpatient hospital services for private health insurance now cost nearly twice as much as Medicare. Outpatient services are more than twice as expensive, and physician services are 43% more costly. Add to this administrative costs for private health insurance that are 10 times higher than Medicare, and Medicare can easily insure the nation at a cost that's more than 30% cheaper than private health insurance. What does 30% mean? Well, let's take it round numbers. Let's say it's 33%. It's a third. Right now, national healthcare spending in the United States is at $18 trillion. 1/3 of that's only $12 trillion. We could cut back the amount we spend now on healthcare to $12 trillion, and we could cover everybody by expanding Medicare to everybody. Now, there's a problem with that, and that is, as Medicare currently operates, there are still the Medicare Advantage premium costs that have to be covered. There are still co-pays and still deductibles. So it's not similar to a Medicare for All program, but it would still be a lot cheaper than what private insurance costs now. For example, private health insurance on the ACA exchanges have an average cost of more than $13,000 per year if you're age 64 and do not qualify, for Medicare. That's over double the per capita spending for Medicare at age 65. Yeah, it's much more than double, certainly for the premiums. The premiums for Medicare, something like $140 a month or something like that. So, what is that, about $1,300 per year? Of course, there are other costs associated with Medicare, the co-pays, deductibles, and so on. It probably ends up costing about $3,500 a year, but that's a lot less than $13,000 per year. To make healthcare affordable, we should move people into Medicare, because every person who moves from private health insurance to Medicare lowers our national healthcare bill. Biden proposed to move millions onto Medicare unfortunately, we'd also expand the inefficient and overpriced private health insurance system. After all, what would Biden be without a giveaway to the private insurance companies? He would build on the ACA by expanding subsidies for people to buy insurance on the private exchanges. Give them more money in the subsidies. ACA subsidies have allowed millions of low and middle income households to buy private health insurance. Biden would increase these subsidies and extend them to households with incomes over 4 times the federal poverty line. Now, this would encourage more to buy health insurance. By using expensive private health insurance, this program would ultimately raise our national health spending. The inefficiency of the private health insurance system and its inability to restrain by the monopoly pricing by elite hospitals and drug companies is the source of rising healthcare costs and would ultimately undermine our healthcare system. This has been the Achilles heel bedeviling the ACA. Of course, we knew this was going to be the Achilles heel bedeviling the ACA when it was under consideration in 2009 and 2010. Everybody warned them about that. They didn't listen. Obama didn't listen. Biden didn't listen. Nancy Pelosi didn't listen. None of them listened. Are they ready to listen 10 years later? Or is it going to be 10 years from now before we get into Medicare for all? The high cost of private health insurance has meant that too many of the insurance plans offered on the exchanges have such high deductibles and other forms of cost sharing that they restrict the care that the insured can afford. Of course they do. We've evaluated the costs, says Friedman and Travis Campbell, and the potential effect on health insurance enrollment in Biden's proposals to expand access to Medicare and increase ACA subsidies might have. This analysis demonstrates, and there's a link here to an analysis by them, how public health insurance can increase enrollment at a dramatically lower cost than using private health insurance. It also shows that the public side of Biden's plan increases enrollment 5 times as much as increasing private insurance subsidies through the ACA, extending coverage compared to nearly 12 million more people compared with 2 million more for the ACA expansion. The cost of the federal government is greater for the larger Medicare enrollment, but the real cost to our country for increasing ACA subsidies is the effect on national health spending and subsidizing private health insurance increases by nearly $5 billion, while the Medicare program lowers expenditures by at least $25 billion. I'm sure it's going to be a lot more than that. Actual savings may be even greater because this assumes only a 30% cost advantage for Medicare. In many other countries, it's more than a 30% cost advantage. For example, in Canada, it's 11% of GDP versus 18% of GDP here. Okay, but New Zealand, it's even lower. In Australia, the costs are even lower. Yeah, in many countries, the cost for a Medicare for All program goes down to 50% of the cost here. In Taiwan, it might be a third of what it costs here.
Cuba, too.
Huh?
Cuba.
Cuba doesn't have a Medicare for All system. Cuba has national health insurance, has a national health service.
Oh.
So they don't have a Medicare for All system. They have a system that's better and even cheaper. The Medicare sufficiency would allow Biden to expand access to health care while restraining spending by utilizing the cost efficiency of traditional Medicare. He could square the circle that has stymied health care reform for decades. Now it is time to act to save money and to save lives. And Gerald Friedman is professor of economics at University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Travis Campbell is a graduate student in economics at University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And that's what they have to say. So that was the healthcare news I wanted to bring to you. Let us shift over to the minimum wage, because there was some news on that score today. A little piece of foolishness, but maybe not so foolish. Maybe the foolishness was on the other side. Anyway, it was an article that appeared in Common Dreams, and it was by Jake Johnson today, February 10th. The headline is, maybe we ought to go to $20 an hour. Why stop at 15, unquote, scoffs a House Republican arguing against the minimum wage provision. And the Republican's name is Timothy Wahlberg. He's a Republican from Michigan. Listen to the hearing on July 14th, 2020. That's a picture of Congressman Wahlberg. And there he is. Anyway, he was attempting to undermine the overwhelmingly popular push for an increase in long stagnant federal minimum wage. As you recall, I pointed out that it's been 12 years since we've had an increase, in the minimum wage. Anyway, he's a Republican on the House Education and Labor Committee, and on Tuesday he said derisively that, quote, maybe we ought to go to $20 an hour, unquote. Why stop at 15? He asked during a marathon committee markup session on Tuesday. This is a rhetorical question that conservatives often deploy in some form when arguing against raising the federal minimum wage, which hasn't been increased in more than a decade, as I said, 12 years. What Wahlberg didn't acknowledge is the fact that had the federal minimum wage kept pace with productivity since 1971, there's no since 1971 in this article, but it is since 1971 that we're talking about, or maybe it's since 1968. I'm not sure which is the benchmark year, but it would be around $24 an hour today, making the $15 an hour wage by 2025 appear to be a modest and bare minimum demand. It's not even a bare minimum demand, it's a chintzy demand. It might have been a bare minimum when it was first suggested, was it in 2011 or 2012? But it's 2021 now. The fight for 15 has been going on since, as I said, 2012. It's 9 years later. Still don't have the 15. Anyway, quote, yes.
Doesn't McDonald's have to pay $25 in France? $25 a month?
I don't recall what they have to pay in France, but last I heard, in Switzerland, they had to pay a minimum wage of $22 an hour.
Oh, okay.
McDonald's. What happens in France, I don't know. It could very well be $25 an hour in France, especially if there's a McDonald's in Paris. So McDonald's workers go to Paris, make $25 an hour. Anyway, making a $15 an hour wage by 2025 appear to be a modest and bare minimum demand, which is how some progressives have characterized it. Quote, this fight was never about 15, it was about a livable wage, unquote, said Representative Cori Bush. The more I hear from Cori Bush, the better I like Cori Bush. She is a wonderful addition to the squad. Quote again, we need to get this done and then get right back to work to fight for more for our communities, unquote. She's absolutely right. What we need is a minimum wage keeping pace with productivity gains since 1968 right now. and we need to make that the median minimum wage. Then we cost adjust it downwards for lower cost areas, and we cost adjust it upwards for higher cost areas. That's what we should be doing. That's the way we should handle this. And we should put in an indexed cost according to the CPI. CPI is different across areas of the United States. There's no reason why people getting a minimum wage in New York City should be, but not only should have to contend with the high prices in New York City on a minimum wage that is geared to other sections of the country where costs are far lower. That leaves minimum wage workers in New York City screwed. It should be a living wage everywhere. That means cost adjusting by local area. Anyway, there's a video with Wahlberg's particular remarks here. What he was basically saying is that he was saying it was because states like my state of Michigan have adapted a higher living wage that we lost industry to other states that had a lower living wage. So he's basically saying it was bad policy to pass a more livable wage in Michigan. That's why we lost all those jobs, which is the most ridiculous thing we'd heard. It was the most ridiculous thing because the only reason why that happened was that there wasn't a living wage in all areas of the United States mandated by the federal government, cost of living adjusted for each local area. Why let the states compete when it comes to minimum wage? Don't let them do it. Prohibit them from doing it and see that the minimum wage is a living wage across all states and cannot be higher in New York than the federal cost-adjusted living wage for New York is. That's what we need to legislate. Democrats on the Education and Labor panel ultimately rejected the arguments of Wahlberg and every other Republican on the committee. Why should we not listen to the arguments of the Republicans? Because they're never in good faith, because the Republicans opposed the minimum wage the first time it was legislated by Roosevelt. And they've done that every time since the issue of raising the minimum wage has come up. They never want to do it. They don't want the minimum wage at all. They're about sabotaging the minimum wage. For a long time, they have been able to satisfy it during the neoliberal period, which hopefully is now over. During the neoliberal period, everybody believed the market does a better job. So basically, they were leaving it to the market. And what did the market do? It took that low minimum wage and kept it as low as possible. The market did not work for people. The living wage is no longer a living wage. The minimum wage is no longer a living wage. It was a living wage back in 1968, but it's not a living wage anymore. Quote, our country's at a pivotal moment in the fight against COVID-19. Today, we sent a clear message to the American people. Help is on the way. Bobby Scott, a Democrat of Virginia, the chairman of the Education Committee, said in a statement on Wednesday, Bobby Scott is the representative from Richmond. Quote, this legislation invests in safely reopening schools, raises wages, and increases safety protections for workers, expands access to affordable care, and provides support for the surge of families facing hunger and hardship during this pandemic. He was talking about the reconciliation bill, which will have the rise in the minimum wage in there. We should be clear. The rise in the minimum wage specified in this bill is nothing to write home about. In the first year, it would go up from $7.25 to $9.25. It would take 4 years for it to get to $15. And $15, as we've already pointed out, is less than 2/3 of what it would have been if the minimum wage had kept pace with productivity in the economy. Instead, what's happened? What's happened is that the rich have pocketed that surplus value. It has gone to them while they've kept wages down, so that they have not kept pace with productivity gains. The productivity gains went into the products of the wealthy, went into other people's pockets, did not go into working class pockets. And the result of that is the horrendous level of inequality we have in our country now. Worse than it's ever been before, certainly worse than it was in 1968. Countering Republican claims that a $15 federal minimum wage would kill jobs, which of course they tried to back up based on a new analysis from the CBO, who cannot project anything with any accuracy. But progressives on the panel argued that such fear-mongering has been thoroughly undermined by the actual experiences of U.S. cities that have increased their wages in recent years. And Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, pointed to Seattle, which in 2014 became the first city in the U.S. to approve $15 an hour minimum wage legislation as a case in point. Quote, when you raise the wage or the bottom floor of workers, they're not stacking that money away in some savings account or going and buying a yacht for Pete's sake, said Jayapal. They're trying to spend it in their communities at small businesses. That is why the small businesses in Seattle did so well, unquote. Anyway, CBO's estimates, which claimed that raising the minimum wage was going to result in 1.4 million in lost jobs over 10 years, okay, not immediately, over 10 years, which means about 140,000 jobs per year. But lots of economists on the progressive side have argued that the agency's methodology was deeply flawed and should not be allowed to influence future policy decisions. Quote, we believe the CBO's assumptions on the scale of job loss is just wrong and inappropriately inflated compared to what cutting-edge economics literature would indicate, wrote experts from the Economic Policy Institute, EPI, which obviously considers itself to be cutting edge. Quote, the median employment effect of the minimum wage across studies of low-wage workers is essentially zero, according to a 2019 review of the evidence, unquote. During Tuesday's committee hearing, Mondare Jones, Democrat of New York, pilloried a GOP amendment that aimed to strip the $15 an hour minimum wage bill from the COVID-19 package and said the United States, quote, cannot maintain a minimum wage so low that people live in poverty even when they work a full-time job, such as in my district, where a household of four must make $100,000 annually in order to cover the bare necessities of life. So he's telling you what goes on in his district. It's a high cost of living district. By the way, the more I hear from Mondare Jones, the more I like him too. Quote, there is not a county in this country where a full-time worker can afford a two-bedroom apartment with the current minimum wage, unquote. He added, quote again, and let's not forget, this is not a $15 an hour minimum wage today, Mr. Chairman, or even tomorrow. This is a $15 minimum wage in 2025, which frankly is not soon enough from my perspective, but this is necessary progress. Working people have needed a raise for years, and so they have. So indeed they have, and I'm glad Mondaire Jones said so. So now, on to the Trump trial, on to day 2 of the conviction trial in the Senate. I don't know how many of you saw any of that. Let's just suffice to say that the Democratic impeachment managers put together a brilliant case thus far, with security footage that was never before seen, that drove home to the people in Congress how close they came to being severely injured or even killed by some of the violent people in the mob that attacked the Capitol, created the insurrection of January 6th. They used the footage and interwove it with Donald Trump's many statements inciting the crowd in a masterly way. The argument was very well organized. Jamie Raskin was wonderful as the primary manager. Joe Neguse was really outstanding. I thought, Joaquin Castro did a terrific job as well in his particular summary. It was measured, it was plain, it was heartfelt. I thought that also the delegate from the Virgin Islands, I think her name is Lacey Plaskett, also did a terrific job in her argument. These lawyers were very, very competent, and they put together a terrific argument showing that this was an insurrection, that it was violent, it was deadly, and that it was a close call. And they also provided a lot of evidence showing that the close call was planned, was worked on for months, and was incited by the President of the United States, who also failed in his duty as Commander-in-Chief to end the insurrection when he might have ended it. But what went on today was the first, I believe, 10 hours or so, of their arguments. They have altogether 16 hours. I don't even know if it was 10 hours. I'm sorry, it was 8 hours. It was from 12 p.m. To roughly 6 p.m. They recessed for dinner just before 6 p.m., I believe about 5:45. They came back about 6:30 and ended their presentation for the day at about 8, or a little after 8. So they used close to 8 hours of their 16 hours, of argument time. And I think what they showed today was that it was a horrendous attack It was an insurrection. It was aimed at harming key members of Congress. It was aimed at assassinating the Vice President of the United States. It was aimed at assassinating the Speaker of the House. These are the second and third people in the line of succession to the presidency. Had those people been caught and killed, the next in line for the presidency, for the rest of the term, would have been Trump's acting Secretary of State. That's who would have been next in line. Somebody completely under Trump's thumb. That's probably what he was going for in the final days. He was going for a situation where he could declare a national emergency and said he had to continue on as president. It was really, this was really a plot to kill and assassinate people who had been elected to their positions. It was an attack on the United States, and I don't think it was emphasized strongly enough today. I'm going to emphasize it here. The violent attack was on the first branch of government. Congress is the first branch of government. The House of Representatives is the people's house, or at least it's supposed to be the people's house. The presidency is not the first branch of the government. It's the executor of the laws, the executive branch. The people who hand down the laws are the people in Congress. The framers considered them the primary branch, not the president, not the Supreme Court justices, the Congress. It is time the Congress took back its position as the first branch of the government. That's in the Constitution, folks. That's in the Constitution. They don't act like it. If they had acted like that all these years, no one would have dared to attack them. No one would have dared to attack them. We've got to restore the authority of the Congress. They have to act like they deserve that authority, starting now with the conviction of Donald Trump. Anyway, tomorrow, the impeachment managers are going to continue the prosecution of the case, starting at 12 noon. Some people believe that they have not yet successfully tied the horrible events, and how horrible they were may only have been brought home to some of the people in Congress, to some of the very senators today. For example, Mitt Romney did not know that his life was probably saved by Eugene Goodman, a Capitol policeman who it was known had saved Mike Pence, had taken Mike Pence to safety. But it was not known that the same Eugene Goodman saved the life, of Mitt Romney when Mitt Romney and some others were heading, looking for safety, heading in the direction of the people who were trying to overturn the Capitol. when Goodman saw them, he warned them and he directed them. He turned them around and directed them to a safe place. And in doing so, he saved their lives. And Romney never knew that. He hadn't seen the security footage. He didn't know how close he came to being caught by the rioters. Now, he probably would have voted for the conviction of Trump anyway, because he has been from the beginning one of the defectors on impeachment who's gone over to the impeachment side. So probably he was going to vote that way anyway. But this was the first time he found out how close he came and how much he owed to a brave member of the Capitol Police Force who saved a number of people that day. So there were others who did not know how close they came. Many, many others. There were House members who knew how close they came because they could hear the attempts to break into the places where they were sheltering in place. So they knew that they were just a few feet away from the rioters who weren't able to get into where they were. But this security footage today was very, very graphic and showed how close the House members and how close the Senate members came to being subjected to violence. And they also showed how violent the people who broke into the Capitol were, the continuing violence on their part, and the continuing search for the leaders of Congress and their demands that these leaders show themselves so they could be hurt by the rioters. It was really graphic, the footage that was shown today. But some people felt they still hadn't quite made the case that there was a direct connection, a straight line connection between incitements by Trump and the specifics of what the rioters at the Capitol did. Now, I don't know what the impeachment managers are going to say tomorrow. It seemed to me today they drew a rather straight line connection between the incitements of Trump and Trump's people, Trump's army, creating a gallows outside of the Capitol, a gallows to be used to hang Mike Pence. A gallows to be used at the incitement of Trump. Now, he didn't say, go create a gallows for Mike Trump. Sorry, for Mike Pence. Mike Trump. For Mike Pence. But he certainly suggested, strongly implied, that his army should coerce Mike Pence into doing the right thing, which was not certifying the vote for Joe Biden.
Pence couldn't have done it anyway.
Barney says that Pence couldn't have done it anyway. Pence certainly didn't have the authority to do it. Whether he could have tried to do it in some illegal way or not, I don't know. But he certainly didn't have the authority to do it, and he was not to step outside of his sphere of authority to do it, and he did not do it. He did not do it. But But the fact is that Trump certainly spoke in such a way so as to urge the mob on to taking action against the leaders of Congress, taking action against the Capitol itself. And he knew, or should certainly have known, that people in his army were proceeding to the Capitol with weapons that they could use to commit violence. All manner of weapons, it turns out. Stun guns, which were delivering hundreds of thousands of volts of electricity to people. Flags that they were using to spear people with. Boards they were using to break into the Capitol. Metal baseball bats. Wearing helmets themselves to be protected. People going to commit violence. That's why they were going there. They were going there to take the Capitol. That wasn't a protest. That was an attempt to take the Capitol away from the elected Congress people. That was an attack on a democracy. Definitely an attack on our democracy and its institutions. It was, an insurrection. I don't know what more the House managers could do to establish the connection between the various things Trump said and what happened. But the other additional 8 hours tomorrow is going to be about that. It's going to be tightening the tie from Trump to what happened on that particular day. As I said, I think it's plenty tight already, but still some people are unsatisfied. So the question is, what will happen when they tie things together even more tightly tomorrow, which is what they're going to do? How will the senators vote? Now, some are inclined to say, for example, Senator Braun, from wherever he's from, Indiana. He's from Indiana. I guess he's the guy who won from Joe Donnelly in 2018. He said that the case of the managers was extremely good. It was very compelling. But if you're a person who does not believe that it's constitutional to impeach a president or to convict a president once that president is gone from the White House, then you still have to vote, but not to convict. So that's going to be the rationale for the senators who do not vote for conviction. So I have this to say to them. I have this to say to them. What are your constituents going to think when the House managers tie very tightly the words of Donald Trump to the attack on the Capitol tomorrow, so that it's plain and clear to the most dense of persons out there that Donald Trump incited this attack against the Capitol, endangered the lives of representatives in the Senate and in the House that the people of the United States just got through electing, that he endangered their lives with an insurrection that he incited. When that case is completely clear, what are they going to think of the questionable constitutional point that you are making? Remember, Donald Trump was impeached before he was out of the White House. The Senate has the charge of conducting a trial for those who have been impeached. There are no time limits in the Constitution for the Senate conviction. Even if you believe that it's unconstitutional to impeach a president when he's not in the White House any longer, and the proper remedy after he's in the White House is prosecution of the former president. Even if you happen to believe that, even if it's unconstitutional to impeach a president after he leaves the White House, Donald Trump was not impeached after he leaves the White House. After he left, he was impeached before he left. You have to complete the trial. You refuse to complete that trial before he left. When was he impeached in the House? By January 10th? Where were you? You were nowhere to be seen on January 10th to hold the trial then. Why not? Because you Republicans were delaying in the hopes that everybody would calm down, that it would just go away, that you wouldn't have to be faced with Trump's people in your own districts, that you could avoid the issue. So out of cowardice, you did not stay in session to do the trial then, to get through with it then, in that last week. You could have done that. We remember. You could have done that. People will remember. Instead, you postponed the trial till the new administration. And now you claim he can't be convicted because you postponed the trial, and you claim that's unconstitutional when it's not even in the words of the Constitution. It's just your interpretation. Do you think that's going to be persuasive? Or do you think people are just going to think that's more Washington gobbledygook, an excuse for not delivering the conviction that this president deserves? What conclusions do you think people are going to draw? Are they going to say, oh, well, it was just unconstitutional, we could convict him? You really think people are going to think that? You really think people are going to go along with that? You really think they're going to believe that? You really think they're just not going to believe it? It's more Washington corruption? Because you people are, well, Anthony Scaramucci was on today with, whose program was he on? Oh, yeah, Zerlina Maxwell. He was on Zerlina Maxwell's program. And he referred to the Republicans as fraidy cats. Fraidy cats. I don't think I've heard that expression since I was 6 years old. He said they're fraidy cats. Scaredy cats. I forget if he said scaredy cats or fraidy cats. But what he was saying is, this is a matter of guts, and you don't have the guts to do your duty. which is to convict this president. So I'll now entertain your comments. Hope you like that. And where were we? Carmen says, shh, Hulk, don't give Facebook any ideas. Shared my ASS off. Carmen says, and invited. Thank you, Carmen. And Kay said, stay healthy, Joe. We need you here. Thank you, Kay. Well, on Friday, we go to take our second shot. We hope there's supposed to be a snowstorm coming here tomorrow. We hope it's over by Friday. In fact, it might be tonight. So we hope that it's over by Friday so we can go get our shots. We have an appointment for 1:45 to get those final shots. But since I'm taking the final shots, there seems to be a greater chance of having a reaction that's incapacitating for a little while. So there's a possibility that I won't be able to have my live stream on Saturday night, because that's if I'm successful in getting the shots on Friday. I still might be under the weather on Saturday, so I'm just, but just in case, okay, I'm pointing that out now. But on the other hand, supposedly older people have less of a reaction to the Moderna shot. Bonnie and I had almost no reaction to the first shot. It was just a little in our shoulder, that's all, and that was it. So we had very minor reactions, so maybe that'll be for the second shot also. We have to see. Kay says, we need the J&J one-shot vaccine now. I don't know if they've been able to manufacture very much J&J. Carmen says, Japan had to let tons of vaccine go bad because they didn't have enough syringes. Sigh. I hope the rest of the world is taking heed. Yeah, get that Defense Production Act in shape. Kay says the virus is going up in Canada too. Yeah, well, of course, because the B117 strain is there. Hopefully they don't have any problems with the South African strain yet. But Deborah Wilson says, got to go watch Oliver Stone's documentary on all our bullshit wars again. It's taking us forever. Okay, Deborah, thanks for coming. Carmen says, sharing vaccine with the rest of the world would indeed make the U.S. great again. Sharing vaccine with the rest of the world would build a tremendous amount of goodwill with the rest of the world. I mean, it's really time we did that. You know, if Cuba had that capacity, they'd be sharing the vaccine with the rest of the world. They would. In fact, as soon as their vaccines are ready, they're going to be sharing the IP with the rest of the world. Steve says, welcome back. And Evelina says, I read Blinken spoke with the Russians about making the Sputnik 5 vaccine in the U.S. Have I heard anything about the talks? No, I haven't, but I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great idea. The more, the merrier. Kay says, haven't heard any of that. Evelina Pont. But by the way, Evelina says Sputnik. Did I say that already? I don't recall. Then Dolores says hi. Oh, hi, Dolores. But didn't you say hello a long time ago? I think you did. And Lana says happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday, Lana. Hey, Lana, did you get the message I sent you about Sham Cherie? Anyway, I sent you one. Check out your Facebook. And Steve says, Evelina, I doubt our government would touch anything Russia invented. Too proud, okay, and arrogant. Well, they could probably get the Russian vaccine at a good price, so it would be a smart thing to do. Certainly a smart thing for us to do.
I think during the impeachment, everybody should have to review the oath of office.
That's a good idea. What Bonnie says is everybody ought to renew their oath of office. But don't they?
So they have to do it.
I think before the Senate proceedings started, they had to swear an oath then
Oh, good.
already. Yes. Kay says, Evelina, you said it works well there. Is it one shot or two? I think the Russian vaccine is 2 shots, if I'm not mistaken. I think the only one-shot vaccine now that I know of is the J&J vaccine. Steve Gonzo said Australia open COVID-19 frequently asked question rules, testing protocols, more. On ESPN, Evelina says 2, but one of the advantages has it that doesn't require special refrigeration. A regular fridge will do. That is a wonderful advantage, isn't it? Evelina says, maybe, maybe not. Eradicating COVID would be something far better to be proud of. It would be. But Lana says, good point. States competing over the minimum wage. Yeah, they were. I mean, it was a race to the bottom. Okay. The southern states were maintaining the race to the bottom, basically. Here's how much of the minimum wage has changed over the years. 2009, $7.25. Yeah, I mean, it's been $7.25 all along. 12 years, as I said. Evelina said, criminal apart from embarrassing. Steve says, that's changing too fast. Steve Wolfbrand, the jokester, says, that's changing too fast. Steve Gonzo says, incremental, short for incredibly mental. Steve Gonzo says. 2 jokesters. And Kay says, my first job, the minimum wage was $160. That's why so many of us are screwed on Social Security. Maybe that is why it hasn't been raised in so long. Think about that. It has to do, to some degree, it has to do with the minimum wage. It's not directly tied to the minimum wage, but it is the cost of living adjustment of Social Security is tied to rises in wages in the private sector, and rise in wages in the private sector has been held back by the fact that the minimum wage has risen so slowly. The wages of everybody else, in a sense, are benchmarked by the market to the minimum wage. Doesn't mean they're the same as the minimum wage, but there are premiums paid for each of the jobs as you go up, but the bottom, the floor, is set by the minimum wage. So that has affected all other wages over time. Steve Gonzo says the text is too blurred to read here, Joe. Sorry, Steve, not much I can do about that. Evelina said, who's running the country anyway? Bunch of miserly old men. Yes, I agree. Steve says, I started at 165, worked there for 2 weeks, long enough to buy my girlfriend the gold necklace she wanted. It was brutal. Washing trays in a bakery at 4 a.m. I started at $1 an hour. I think it was $1 an hour. I worked as a stock boy in a department store. I didn't think that was brutal. I was lifting a lot of clothes and stuff like that. They used to have stock boys then. What they do now in the department stores now, I know this because Bonnie worked in the department store for a while, is all the stocking stuff is done by the sales ladies now. So they no longer pay stock boys. At one time, these department stores used to pay stock boys, employ them at a minimum wage. The sales ladies did not have to do that heavy work. Young, strong high school kids did it. Those were the days, my friends.
Don't start singing.
Those were the days, my friends. Evelina Pond says, oh. Steve Wolfbrand says, oh, Steve. Kay says, Steve, I worked in an ice cream stand. Evelina says, my first job, a file clerk, laugh out loud. Kay says, I actually sat through most of it today. They all were wonderful. Yeah, they were great. Anna says, I like Joe Neguse from Colorado. So glad you brought him to my attention during hashtag replace Pelosi. Yeah, I think Joe Neguse is, I mean, he's really extremely good at speaking. He's very logical. He's very personable. And he's for Medicare for all. And he's for the Green New Deal. And he's for H.R. 1. And on every position that I've seen him take, he has the progressive position. I don't know why he's not a squad member. I mean, it seems to me, in terms of the positions he takes on bills and things like that, he's certainly qualified. So it could be he takes some campaign contributions from some people. I don't know, or some corporations. I don't know what that's about. I don't know whether he does or he doesn't. I haven't actually looked it up. Carmen says, Officer Goodman saved Romney too. Even Pence had to hightail it out of there. Evelina says, did she look like Angelina Jolie? And Steve said, Jennifer Aniston from Friends. Kay said, my internet keeps going out again. Grr. Evelina says, Steve Wolfbrand, laugh out loud. Carmina says, great point about the next in line for the presidency. That says everything. Steve Wolfbrand said, did you pay the bill? Evelina says, hi, Carmen, don't get me started. Laugh out loud. Kay says, yes, it was paid, but Spectrum sucks here. Okay, and Liz Netherlands said, I always thought the free branches were equal. Axis checks and balances. Was I taught wrong? No, there are checks and balances, but Article 1 is of the Constitution. The first article in the Constitution defines the authority and functions of the Congress. Why is Article 1 about the Congress and not about the executive? Because the framers were very aware that the legislature should be the first branch of any Republican government. That what gives the Republican government, the legitimacy it should have is the acts of the legislators. It wasn't about the president in those days. Yes, we had a presidential system, but it was really a system defined by the separation of powers. The role of the executive was conceived in those days much more narrowly, especially when it came to domestic politics. The tradition of activist presidents, there were only a handful of really activist presidents. Andrew Jackson was one. Some would argue Thomas Jefferson was one. But Lincoln, of course, was a very activist president. There was not another activist president until Teddy Roosevelt, really. Teddy Roosevelt was the first president to begin to approach the modern model of the presidency. Then there was Wilson, who was very activist as a president also. And then, of course, a model that's really the model handed down to us as Franklin Roosevelt. But I think the pendulum towards the power of the president has swung much too far towards the president. It was this business of giving the president the full authority to negotiate trade agreements, and then Congress providing authority for the president to do trade agreements, and then just have an up or down vote from the Congress, rather than regular order where the Congress has the right to amend. No, that's paring back the role of the Congress much too far, and doing everything as a congressional executive agreement, rather than taking the trouble to negotiate actual treaties that would require the consent of 2/3 of the Senate. No, that's going too far also. It's going beyond the original Constitution. And it takes away a lot of the power of Congress. Now, to be fair, Congress has been giving away that power because the representatives don't have the guts to want to be accountable. They want to blame everything on the president when they can blame everything on the president. And then the president wants to blame everything on the filibuster. So we have a system where the presidency tries to avoid accountability and the Congress tries to avoid accountability. What it's about is actually avoiding democracy, is avoiding accountability to the people, and only having accountability to the donors. You know, that's what it's really all about. Steve Gonzo said, my first job was printer shop at the local newspaper. He says, I've had 300 plus jobs. My God, Steve, that's a lot of jobs. I mean, I'm not sure I had even 15 jobs, much less 300. Evelina says, cool first job. Steve Wolfbrand said, hey, that's my line. Carmen said, thank the stars, the insurrectionists were incompetent, like Herr Fuhrer. They weren't so incompetent. I mean, they got in. They harmed people. They gave the Capitol Police a big run for their money. They were uncontrolled for a while. They got away from the scene of the crime clean. Now, they were hunted down afterwards, okay, a number of them, okay, and arrested, but they got to walk out of there. If they had sense enough to go to Mexico or something, they'd still be at large. Steve Gonzo said, was and is still called the Courier. Okay, honey, you've got noise coming out of your computer.
There's not anything on that I know of.
There's something on. Carmen says, yeah, killing a Capitol cop with a fire extinguisher is horrific. But they also speared another Capitol cop. Evelina says, horrible. Yeah, Dot, that insurrection was worse than I thought. Went on for hours. They were out for blood. Yeah, that doesn't mean the whole mob there was out for blood. But it does mean there were people in the mob using the mob, and they were out for blood. They were out for capturing people, for assassinating people, for taking hostages. Kay says, I heard that Pence is still hiding to a point. Carmen says, brutal and sadistic. Yep. I don't know if Pence is still hiding. I can well believe that. Carmen says, the thing is, everyone knew the attack was coming, and yet no one took it seriously. How did that happen? I don't know, but I don't know why the Congress people themselves weren't on the tail of the Capitol Police saying, What are your plans to protect us on the 6th? Why weren't people attentive to that? Did they just think their protection was going to happen automatically? Were they simply leaving it to the police? Sam Holmbeck said, how do you feel the fallout of the Capitol riots may affect our future protest efforts? We always talked about showing up to Congress by the millions, demand Medicare for all and others. Can we still do that? Yes, I think we can, but I think we have to show up in the millions without any weapons, without any intent to do violence, with serious discipline. We have to protest in nonviolent ways. I think there will be people in Congress who will be on our side and who will defend us against attempts at false equivalence to try to say this is the same thing as the mob that Trump ordered, that Trump called up. I think we can still do that. We can certainly come to the Capitol, to D.C., and have a huge march downtown or something like that. We can still come and paralyze the city with nonviolent protests. We can do that. I still think that we can do that. Of course, much will depend on whether the progressives in Congress can block the legislation from the authoritarians, which will certainly be forthcoming. They'll have to block it in some way. Evelina says, very suspicious, isn't it? Carmen says, Republicans don't care what their constituents might think. They're planning on sabotaging voting altogether. Yes, and that gets back to the point. We must get rid of the filibuster. H.R. 1 has to be passed. It will not be passed. Okay, it won't be passed unless we get rid of the filibuster. That is central. Okay, we got to be able to pass it with 50 plus 1 votes. We have to be able to pass it so various efforts at sabotaging voting cannot be implemented by the GOP. We have to stop the voter suppression. Okay, that's been going on. And we have to stop the gerrymandering. That's been going on as well. That can be done with H.R. 1 and S1, the corresponding Senate bill. But that's going to have to be passed in the Senate with 50 plus 1 votes, because every Republican is going to vote against that. They rely on sabotaging voting. And Steve Wolfbrand said, where were the cops? Sam Holmbeck said, thanks for the show. Sure, Sam, thanks for helping me out with the promo. Always very important. Okay, I really appreciate your help. Steve Wolfbrand said, where were the cops? There weren't enough cops. There weren't enough cops. That was the fault, okay, of the leadership. But I have to think that the Congress people weren't sitting on top of the Capitol Police. They were just thinking, well, the Capitol Police will take care of it. We have plenty of security here. They didn't. They didn't have enough security to cope with a mob like that, even though they knew Trump had been agitating for such a mob. It was all public. Carmen said, actually, they're straight up pussies. Yes, that was incredible, Hulk. Steve Gonzo said, standing down, standing by. Steve Gonzo said, anyone can see hashtag cat lawyer, laugh out loud. Kay says, I'm ready to go to Cuba, laugh out loud. And Lana says, no, I did not receive the message on the restaurant. My Facebook has been shut down all week. They slapped me down when I called the right-winger garbage. Have they slapped you down when it comes to private messaging? Okay, because I sent you a private message on it, Lana. When he kept blaming homeless people for their plight, seems a bit much. My parents are dead, and I resent the FB algorithms trying to take their place. Me too. Me too. You can't call a right-winger garbage when he kept blaming homeless people for their plight? It is a bit much. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Steve Wolfbrand says, I've been to Cuba a lot. It's very nice. Steve Wolfbrand said, no, I want to see it. Kay says, let's go, Steve. Steve Gonzo says, just click the hashtag. Halana says, the bakery, time to make the donuts. Kay says, yes, I helped stock a Walmart in Wilmington. Gee, was there a Walmart all the way back then, Kay? How old is Walmart anyway? The only thing I can remember from the 60s is Kmart's.
Five and 10. My first job was 5 and 10.
Yeah, 5 and 10, which later became the Kmart's.
Yeah.
Well, the 5 and 10, okay, was Woolworth's, actually.
Was it?
Yeah. The Kmart's were at first the Kresge's. Okay, and I think then they morphed into Kmart's. Who was it who bought Woolworth's? I think they were the first 5 and 10. And Carmen says, guys, I missed a lot of comments, not realizing I was watching from another page. Sorry, wasn't ignoring you. Just been out of the loop too long. And Steve Wolfbrand says, Joe the Goose sounds like a mafia boss. No, Joe Neguse. His name is Neguse. His parents were immigrants from Eritrea. So Neguse must be an Eritrean last name. And Lana says, I just looked up the restaurant in Virginia, still open, woohoo. I hope you and Bonnie will take food to go. Well, we're being very careful about taking any outside food until we get our second shots and the immunity, and we think is there. Carmen said, hi, Evelina, just heard your comment as Dr. J was reading them out. Finally on my own page. Steve said, I did 3 months in FB jail. Evelina said, Steve Wolfbrand, they're working on 4 vaccines, 1 already in phase 3. The Cubans, you mean? Yeah. And Steve Wolfbrand said, the Cubans, and Evelina said, Steve Wolfbrand, yes. 1 in collaboration with the Iranians. Yes, I read that too. That they had 1 in collaboration with Iran. Kay says, Cubans take care of their people. Yeah, they do. I think the life expectancy in Cuba is just about as high as it is here now. If not higher, I have to look that up. Steve, so Cuba's actually very advanced in medical development of vaccines and such, and they have one for lung cancer, and for public health. They're very wonderful in public health because they're organized in such a way that the doctors live out in the countryside all over Cuba. They're in neighborhoods there. They have direct contact with people all the time. They go to people's houses. For COVID, they've been checking on people every week on how they are and what they're doing to stay safe from COVID. That's how they've kept down the fatalities per million. What are they right now? I don't know. I haven't looked at them for a long time. But they are doing very well compared to people around them. I know that. Let me see where they are. Egypt, Algeria, Myanmar, Japan. They as low as Japan, I don't know. Venezuela, Gabon, South Korea. Yes, Cuba is 154th in fatalities per million. They have only 22 fatalities per million. They have been having a problem of late, though. They just had 5 new deaths, which is quite high for them. They have 11 million people. They've had total deaths in Cuba of 249. Out of 11,322,361 people. That is very good. By comparison, it's better than Hong Kong, which is at 25 deaths per million. Better than Malaysia, 28 deaths per million. Better than South Korea, 29 deaths per million. And better than Australia at 35 deaths per million. So that is very interesting. They have very low number of deaths per million. And I think we can trust their statistics. I don't think the Cubans screw around with their statistics. So, boy, wish we had only 22 deaths per million. But there it is. And Carmen says, I'm wondering if Biden will be a tariff sheriff too. I don't think in the same way, no. I don't think he's going to be a tariff sheriff. Kay says, I heard that, Steve. Carmen says, Honey Bonnie is dancing disco on her computer. Steve says, I think they gave the selfie incriminating lady permission to take her Mexico vacation. But WTF, I'm not sure what that's about, but I don't know that anything is more dangerous in Mexico than it is here. In terms of deaths per million, okay, I think the Mexicans are still behind us in deaths per million, but let me look that up. Yes, they are currently at 1,298 deaths per million. So, arguably, whoever goes to Mexico would be better off there than here, at least when it comes to fatalities per million. Of course, Mexico has got a lot of new cases. They're a little less than 1/3 the size of the United States. They have 1,701 new deaths yesterday. That would be the equivalent here of I don't know, something like about 4,800. Whereas we had 3,400 yesterday. So things, it looks like things are going south in Mexico very rapidly. But in fatalities per million, we still are leading them. So Evelina says, what? Carmen says, courts are being way too lenient on the insurrectionists. That's the Klan robes peeping out from under their judicial robes. Steve says, Fox 29, accused Capitol rioter allowed to travel from Mexico retreat. That's awful. That is awful. That is stupid and awful. Thank God COVID is finally dissipating here in LA County. Not sure why. Herd immunity? I don't know. Could be just people staying home because they're frightened to death. Lana says, cat lawyer was hilarious. I don't believe the propaganda for 1 second. Carmen says, Trump told the military not to come. Kay says, I lived in Wilmington from 95 until Scott died in 2016. Carmen says, I hear doctors in Cuba do not get a salary. I don't know that I heard that. I guess I'll try to find that out. I have the impression they all work for the National Health Service, and they do get a salary from the National Health Service. Evelyn says, Cuba has an excellent track and trace system for COVID. They do. That's because they have all these local doctors all around the country. Evelina says, not a high salary, but they get paid. Carmen, you've been listening to the Cubans in Florida who think that the low salary that they get paid in Cuba is the same as nothing, right? Because the Cubans in Florida with doctors get paid so much more because they get to charge their own fees. It's fee for service in Florida, but not in Cuba. Lana says, shouldn't Biden roll back Trump's tariffs and sanctions? Yes, he should. But I think it's got to be done on a case-by-case basis, but he should certainly roll back the sanctions. In most cases, the sanctions are just illegal. According to international law, the sanctions are illegal. The sanctions on Iran, the sanctions when it comes to Venezuela, they're illegal. Sanctions on Cuba are illegal. Doc, I once smuggled $2,000 worth of medicine into Cuba. I bought the shit in Mexico. The border patrol caught me at the border, but after I told them what I was doing, they winked and let me go. They're not all bad people. I'm sure they're not. Carmen said, did the guy, insurrectionist, get to go to Peru for his wedding? God. Evelina says there are about a dozen U.S.-funded social media outlets, some in Cuba even. They're mostly out of Florida, though. Steve says, well, that could be a movie. Steve says, Capitol Police to hold a vote of no confidence in the force's leadership following the Capitol riot. Yeah, no, I think the person who is heading the Capitol Police Force then has already resigned. So they have a new leadership, but the question is whether the new leadership should stay on. Lana says sanctions are cruel. Not only cruel, they kill people, they kill civilians, and the particular sanctions which the U.S. has been involved in in recent years are all illegal. Steve says, of course, Cuban doctors get paid. I mean, they're basically war crimes, is what they are. Steve says, they violate uh, human rights. They're against the treaties which the U.S. signed, the commitments the U.S. made when it founded, the United Nations. Steve Wolfbrand said, of course Cuban doctors get paid. Not a lot. Some patients tip them in advance. Lana says, and Mike Norman said, the more we make the dollar harder to use internationally, the faster it gets away from being the world currency. It's just stupid. Well, it might be stupid because we want it to be the world's currency, but I don't think that brings us any advantage, myself. All it does is it makes it easier for us to spend on our military internationally, which is not actually necessarily a good thing for us, but it doesn't do anything for us in relation to the U.S. having a sovereign currency. For that, it doesn't matter whether we're the reserve currencies or whether they're a part, or whether we're just a part of a market basket, of currencies. For the foreseeable future, if they go away from the dollar, we'll be part of a market basket, of currencies that will include a bunch of other currencies as well. That's probably the best way to do it. Carmen says, open Smart News and read, quote, Biden in first call with China's Xi talks of unfair economic practices. That's been a line which the U.S. has been talking about for ages. I have no idea whether it's really true or not. Carmen says, open Smart News and read, ugly third wave of COVID-19 around April, inevitable for Ontario, expert says here. That's probably because the UK strain has come and it's just spreading and they're not containing it. They have to seriously contain it. Okay, folks, I think I've caught up to you now and that we're just about all done. So thank you for coming and thank you for the conversation. And I'll see you tomorrow night. I expect to be here. And I hope that you'll be here too. Carmen says, will it jump here then too? If it's the UK variant, it's already here, Carmen. In other words, there are many people who suspect that the extreme rise in cases in the LA area over the last month was actually caused by the UK variant. And it's been also seen in many states, including Virginia. There are cases, of the UK variant here too. So if that's the variant we're talking about, that's what's going to happen. Dolores says thank you and good night. Lana says thank you and good night. Evelina says thanks, good night everyone. Kay says thank you all for a great discussion. Love you all, and we love you too, Kay. And Boss Life says the USA Supreme Court Conference on February 19th to hear election cases in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. We'll see what happens. Can you post a link to that, please, Boss Life? I'd like to see that article. Carmen Buna says, great program. It's an honor to be back. Missed everyone, especially Burning Wolf. Mr. Wolf Brand, I presume. Anyway, good night again, everybody. Have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow.